I am here with Amy Demma from the Law Offices of Amy Demma. I'm so excited about today's legal conversation around third-party reproduction. Amy, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure to be here. Hello to everybody.
This is a really important topic for a couple of reasons. I mean, third-party reproduction itself has been pretty accessible in the United States for a long time. However, state by state, things have varied wildly. I first want to hear what your path was to being in the field of fertility itself.
Yep. So I was diagnosed with PCOS at the age of 17, obviously not in family building mode at that age, but I knew that infertility was going to be a part of my journey to parenthood. I started I have 25-year-old IVF twins. I started my infertility treatment about 28 years ago. It was really challenging for me at that time, and why I am so supportive of MedAnswers and other such resources is 28 years ago, I thought I was the only person in the country going through infertility. There was no internet. There was no access to even places like Resolve. 2 or 3 years into my journey, I found a flyer about Resolve in a clinic in Colorado, and that was the first I knew that there were other people like me. And so I was eventually blessed with success. Rachel and Matthew are now 25 years old, and they are thriving and wonderful and a great blessing. And from that, I decided to dedicate my career to assisting others that are going through the struggles of infertility or unable to conceive without assistance.
That's incredible. So you had a whole life before struggle and a whole career path. And then the first thing that you did was you had an egg donation agency. So you gained all that experience around, helping people access egg donors. So can you take us through a little bit about the history of kind of egg donation and the difference, of course, between, fresh egg donor cycles versus frozen, which always sounds so weird when you're talking about human eggs, right?
Sure, but I'll take another step back. Before I launched Prospective Families, which was then purchased by a larger egg donor agency, I actually worked for Resolve National when they were headquartered in Massachusetts and working on a national mandate for fertility. I was living in Massachusetts at the time. That's where their home base was, and I had the pleasure of working for them. That was my first step into this world. Resolve National then made the very strategic move to DC to address these issues on a federal level. I then became engaged with Resolve of New England. I was a vice president there for many years, and then I was the president of Resolve of New England. It was at that time that I launched Prospective Families, and it was my pleasure for approximately 5 years ago or so to assist folks needing donors in their family building equation. At that point in time, fresh cycles were the only option. At that point in time, anonymous donors were pretty much the only thing we were doing. I am delighted that intended parents now have so many more options, which, by the way, has resulted in a larger national donor pool. So there are more young women able to participate in the donation process because of the advances in technology. So the intended parent now who is needing to rely on a donor has a shorter path to making their embryos, a shorter path to identifying their donors, and lots of options.
That's amazing. So just to touch on one thing, just last week, we were all advocating for national insurance coverage 25 years after you were working with Resolve on national insurance coverage.
28 years was the first time I walked into a clinic in Colorado. The way my husband and I approached our family building was, if I saw a head on a cover of a magazine on Cosmo, infertility, picked that up, opened it up, saw a doctor's name, told my husband we're getting on a plane. We went from New York to Denver, from Denver to San Diego, from San Diego to Mexico, all the while I'm the only person doing this. And so the resources that are available today, particularly in the patient advocacy arena, just stoke me every day. And that's why I get up to do what I do. It's really exciting.
I love it. And then after you sold your egg donor agency, you went into law. So you already had an advocacy background because of your work with Resolve. Correct. But then you utilizing your law degree to actually cover the legal side of things, which is, I think, this is also an area where people don't know how to navigate, right? So I'd like to understand because you do a lot of education, do a lot of advocacy, you don't just try to find new clients. What do you really recommend people look for when they're trying to find and kind of pick their attorney? It's a very intimate relationship on the family building path.
It is an intimate relationship, but thankfully the intended parent already has trusted sources to go to. They're not just opening, so to speak, the yellow pages. So I always say to prospective parents, speak to your clinic. Find out who the doctors like. More importantly, find out who the nurses regularly engage for legal services for their patients,
right?
Who they incorporate into the family building team. Mental health professionals, another great source for referrals to not only attorneys, but to all other third parties that need to be brought in to this very collaborative effort. There are some terrific directories of assisted reproductive technology attorneys. Our acronym is ART. We are ART attorneys. I know nothing about painting or photography. I know about assisted reproductive technology. And so ASRM actually has a legal professionals group. And there is a directory of the members of the legal professionals group at the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. Alice, you and I spoke about developing a legal resources page for MedAnswers or something that your folks can access. I will be doing that for you, and we'll get that happening pretty quickly. But if in the short term someone needs more details about the resources that I'm going to recommend, they can contact me directly. The bottom line is, because we are speaking to folks on a national scope right now, the bottom line is you want to engage an ART attorney, someone who has experience in this field, and that doesn't mean a family attorney, and it may not mean an adoption attorney, but it means someone who understands how parentage is managed when there is a third and sometimes fourth party. So for gay couples, they need a gamete donor, and they may also need a carrier. So it's not just third party reproduction. Sometimes we've got multiples. And then I've got clients who are doing sperm donation, egg donation to make their embryos, and then a carrier. So you want to consider all of the parties engaged. As prospective parents, you want to speak with an attorney that's got experience in that very, very complex endeavor of bringing all those folks who do have independent legal interests. The donors want to be sure, for example, that they know that they're going to get compensated. The donors want to be sure that they are going to be treated safely by the clinic. The donors want to be sure that they aren't going to be held to any parentage responsibilities despite having a genetic connection. The woman who is carrying and birthing, in many, many states, there's something called a presumption of maternity. You're carrying, you're giving birth, we're presuming you're the mother. Carriers don't want that risk. And so engaging an ART attorney, someone experienced specifically in this very niche field, is who you're accessing for counsel. You'll want to do that as prospective parents with somebody licensed in your state. You'll pick up the phone, you'll ask for a consult. Hey, this is what I'm intending to do. These are the various folks that will come together to help us build our family, or help me build my family if we're doing it as a single party. What do I need to know about the laws in my state?
That's so critical, because the laws vary wildly by state to state.
The laws vary wildly by state to state.
And in this day and age, sometimes, I mean, in the case of fertility preservation or divorcees who have leftover embryos who might get embryo custody, and then there's a presumption in California of parentage if you're married and using an embryo, even if it's genetically unrelated, even if the embryos were created before the marriage, you know, by an anonymous donor, there's a presumption of parentage. So these are complex cases. You can't go to Uncle Bob, who does wills, you know, for the family, or does contract law for corporate America, and expect them to really understand the ins and outs of this. And when it comes to such a delicacy, you know, state to state, of understanding the nuances here, that part is so critical. This is not an area to try to cut corners.
It is not an area to try to cut corners. And frankly, relatively speaking to the other costs engaged in collaborative reproduction, legal fees are actually just a small piece of that.
Absolutely.
Where the risks, if we're not taking care of what we need to take care of appropriately, the risks are so high with a potential of extreme cost.
Exactly.
So,
I think it's also important to know, that it's not the same attorney representing the gamete donor or the gestational carrier and the intended parents.
That is correct.
That it's going right. So everybody will have their own representation.
In states where there is statutory law regulating how art is practiced, many of those states have incorporated into their statute a mandate that each party have independent legal counsel. In states where no such statute is on the books, and likely probably one is pending, but in states where there isn't a mandate for independent legal counsel, parties should understand, both donors, carriers, and parents should understand that as art attorneys, we absolutely hold it as best practices for parties to have independent legal counsel. Now, lots of times I have the pleasure of doing what we call known donation. We'll talk a bit about that in just a minute. Or sometimes even sperm donation. And the parties will say, well, it's my sister donating her egg to us, and so we really don't need independent legal counsel. And it takes me 30 seconds to convince why, yes, all of us, even the opposing, if you will, attorneys, the independent attorneys, we all have the same goal here. We want a family to come to be. We want a baby to be born. There's no adversarial relationship, but there's the potential for it. Parties do have interests that are independent of each other. The sister who very much wants her sister to have a baby, she wants to make sure she's not ever deemed a mother. And so we have to protect her in a different way than we protect the intended parent.
Without a doubt. And we've all read the cases in states that had loose laws or changing laws where, maybe a known donor was then sought after even by state care, right? Or state aid or Medicaid, and expected to pay child support. So we've all heard those cases. I think hopefully we've sufficiently scared everyone, appropriately so, to say, like, don't try to skip this step, don't cut corners. Now let's go to that known donor model, though, because that's kind of the area that I was talking about, is that sometimes the troublesome stories are in the known donor realm, because you think, no, I've known this person for 30 years, or this is my sister, this is my gay best friend. There are so many scenarios out there. There are co-parenting websites that are like Match.com, which make me very nervous when I look at them, for people to try to, have their family that way, right? So talk us through, what does known donor really mean? Let's start there.
All right, but I'm going to start one step back and say these websites, these Match.com type websites, and I heard recently that one of the stars from Sex and the City is about to launch a bachelor type program for Find My Egg Donor. And so they'll have a single recipient as the star of that season, and then the folks competing. So here's the thing, before we get known anonymous, which is very, very important. I'm so glad to talk about that topic.
But I'm unsettled now.
Downloading contracts from the internet. There is no such thing as a template agreement in assisted family building. There's no such thing as a template kid. There's no such thing as a template family. Every arrangement has very, very unique criteria on how we address protecting all parties. So the cases that you're hearing about often on the internet, when the purported or would-be donor is held to be a parent, is often because they Googled, someone on Facebook said, I'll share my contract with you, they downloaded a contract. No do. You engage an attorney and you have a contract that is drafted specifically to reflect the unique arrangements of your collaborative family building effort. Anonymous versus known donor. So for the longest time, anonymous sperm donation and anonymous egg donation was the way to go. We had the occasional cases of the sister, the friend, the cousin who was offering gametes out of their heart. Some of my favorite cases to work on. They're wonderful. We're seeing quite a shift in the trend now towards known, both sperm and egg, and also known embryo donation, by the way. And that trend is being inspired, and I'm delighted about this, by our mental health colleagues who are publishing reliable data in our medical journals that is suggesting that not only is disclosure of collaborative family building a best plan or something that certainly parents should take into good consideration, but also that access to the donor longer term, not necessarily for a relationship between the donor conceived child and the donor, but access to medical information.
So incredibly critical. And I think that the adoption attorneys were also very much a part of that movement as well, especially to access to the medical records. And when I 12 years ago did my fertility preservation, I've been very public about having a donor conceived child. I didn't have that view. All I had was 5 days to pick a sperm donor because I needed to move on to cancer treatment. And quite frankly, all I was being was protective. And now, knowing what I know, I have a much different view. And of course, my son has asked. He's grown up in reproductive medicine like your kid, so he asks all the questions, and I use correct terminology, and I give him all the answers and all the information. And when he asked, I think at age 2 or 3, I think 3, and he said, "Will I get to meet him?" And I said, "I hope so." And that was the best answer that I had, is I hope we both get to. I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity. And I wouldn't go back and undo the choice to use a fully anonymous, but then of course, also what's exploded in the last decade, a little bit longer, is the access to the genetics. So the idea that we can have a fully anonymous donor anymore is really obsolete.
Sure it is. And when I first started, I was all about protecting the anonymity of the donors I was representing. That's what we thought was the best thing to do for all parties.
And we've all
thank goodness. And it is really a result of colleagues like you and I coming together and saying, "Hey, did you read that research? Have you heard what this colleague has been lecturing about?" And so we are constantly evolving toward better and better practices that also include the best interest of the child. So we're also moving towards the whole family, but also by making sure. And what's fascinating to me is I've reached out to donors who absolutely were anonymous. I represented them. I promised them that they would have anonymity, reached back out to them and said, "Oops, Ancestry.com has happened, or DNA consumer sites has happened."
You can do anything about it, sure.
And the response is, "I'd be happy to be in touch. If there's anything I can do."
That's incredible.
You don't want to come over for Thanksgiving dinner. The parents don't want the donors over for Thanksgiving dinner, but having that access has become a priority in assisted family building.
And there are still countries that mandate full anonymity, and that they're going to have to catch up. And you also help a lot of international family building. How do you counsel people who might need to access a donor in a country like Spain that is fully anonymous?
So if we have prospective parents going to Spain to engage in an egg donation program there, the first thing I'm doing is finding a Spanish attorney, right? So even if, and this happens a lot when we do egg donor counsel, and then our clients need to go on to surrogacy. So because surrogacy is still not allowed in New York, I have to graduate my egg donor clients out of my practice. And so it's a very common thing for me to say, go talk to my friends in California, or go talk to my friends in Chicago, in Illinois, or wherever it is that they're looking for their surrogate, for example. And I absolutely will recommend that intended parents who are leaving the U.S. for egg donation find counsel in the country in which you're doing this. I don't have the credentials or the expertise to offer the counsel, but we do, as art attorneys here in the States, have great relationships with our international colleagues, and we work collaboratively.
That's great.
If I have prospective parents that are considering going to a country where anonymity is their only option, we'll spend a good hour talking about what our mental health colleagues and our adoption colleagues are telling us, and maybe that's not the best plan for them, or perhaps it is. But I think the more informed the prospective parent is, the better the path. The easier.
Without a doubt. I mean, it's the entire mission of the Fertility Answers platform, right? Is preventing this misinformation, and that a fully informed person can have actual informed consent. And without that, I don't believe that informed consent can exist.
Agreed.
I do want to touch on, before we wrap up, Amy, the changing legal landscape in New York. It's a very exciting time. I mean, I have chills because, as we just mentioned, there are some laws you've been part of advocating for 28 years that still aren't in place. Sometimes it takes decades for us to get in place insurance access. And in this case, the changing legal landscape is that surrogacy will be enacted as law in 2021 in the state of New York. So can you take us through a little bit about what the effort was? Because I know you were one of the advocates that was like, year after year, putting your voice and your muscle and your efforts behind that.
Yep, lots of miles logged by many of my colleagues and myself here in New York since 2012, when the Child Parent Security Act was first introduced. Lots and lots of trips to Albany. I love talking about the Child Parent Security Act because now I can talk about the success of the Child Parent Security Act. My Facebook memories come up, and my Facebook memories from this time of year, when the legislative session is coming to an end, have been, please call your senator, please call your representative. And now I don't say no more calls about the CPSA. Okay, so here's the scoop. So the only surrogacy that is currently allowed in the state of New York is altruistic or non-compensated surrogacy. And while we do a good deal of it, and we do a good deal of it because, quite frankly, there are a few of us in New York that practice this law, so we're getting the cases that are coming our way, it is pretty hard for a party to find somebody who is willing to carry without any compensation, right? I mean, even if we just consider what the risks are for somebody to agree to do that. So the Child Parent Security Act, which was passed on April 2nd by the New York legislature, signed on April 3rd by our wonderful Governor Andrew Cuomo, will become law. Well, it is law. It will become effective on February 15th, 2021. So for the New Yorkers out there, either the prospective carriers or the prospective parents, you are not at the starting line yet. If you begin to engage in compensated surrogacy in a formal way, you will be in violation of current New York law. February 15, 2021 is when we can proceed. So be very careful. And what I say to my New York clients now is, and prospective gestational carriers, is spend this time figuring all the other things out. What are you looking for in a carrier? Why are you looking for that in a carrier? What sort of contact would you want? What sort of involvement do you want? All of those things, that decisions that may have to be made in a very concentrated period of time. You find a carrier and she's ready to go and she wants you to sign on and can make a commitment. Now you've got the luxury of several months of really flushing out these issues so that on February 15, 2021, you are ready to go. February 15, 2021, compensated gestational surrogacy becomes legal in the state of New York. Traditional surrogacy, where the surrogate's eggs are fertilized and she is carrying a baby with whom she has a genetic connection, is outlawed in New York. It is outlawed today in New York. It will be outlawed under the Child Parent Security Act, and it is outlawed in most states. Traditional surrogacy, no can do. If you're considering traditional surrogacy, whatever state you are in, get on the phone tomorrow to an art attorney. Make sure you understand that legal landscape.
You are so articulate about this. I felt like I didn't even have to ask any questions, Amy. Thank you so much. This is incredible information. We will include all kinds of links in the comments for everyone. And as Amy mentioned, we're collaborating on a resource at fertility.medanswers.com. Yep. Amy is available on the Fertility Answers app platform to answer any questions, generalized legal questions that apply to everyone. Of course, she can answer if they're specific to New York. She will dive in on that. Amy, you're a gem. Thank you so much for all these years of advocacy work and just your commitment to patient education. I'm so grateful for you.
I'm getting teary. The people who do this work love doing this work.
I love doing this work. I'm getting teary. I know. I have chills like 8 times.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone. We'll see you on the Fertility Answers app platform, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.